in this. So welcome, and I'm glad you're here.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. So, Southeastern Indians, little bit of background and how to research them. There is a ton of different people, a ton of materials and whatnot. So most of what I'm going to talk to you about is going to be limited to within the scope of the 5 tribes. So Chickasaw, Choctaw, Cherokee, Muskogee or Cree, and the Seminole. We'll go very quickly through the history because there are, depending on who you speak to, if you speak to the people themselves, there's thousands of years of history. If you speak to the anthropologist, there's about 400 or 500 years at most, right? So all of that time, we don't have the time in one day to go through all of that and all of the theories, because the other thing is nobody agrees on this or that, right? Everybody has their own idea. There is some overlap. So today we have a little introduction. What is Native American genealogy? A little short slide, what I call Who's Your Grandma? And then we're going to talk about Indians in the Southeast, the originals, the removed, and then today. And then we'll go through some of the records that are available today, kind of wrap things up, and then any questions you guys may have. Okay. So genealogy. It requires a cross-disciplinary approach that involves studying the history and culture of the tribe, the records created by the United States government, and the local and church records. Native American genealogy is also influenced by the value system and the respect for the Mother Earth of the people, which, being Choctaw and doing Native American genealogy for nearly 30 years now, I love it because it combines not just genealogy, but you're looking at history, anthropology, language, all of these things combined into one just to find out about your ancestors, more so than if you are working on European lines in the US, right? So who's your grandma? When I'm working with Indian genealogy, there are 2 main types of people. The ones that I call Indians, they for certain know, they've got that paper trail. They may be enrolled or unenrolled. So some of the clients I've had in the past that are unenrolled, they were adopted, and so they're trying to figure out their way through the system and get enrolled, right? Then there are those that are unenrolled for other reasons, whether it be because of stipulations with DAWs or personal reasons, whatever the case may be. They're unenrolled, but they know for a fact who their ancestors are. They know they have that connection to that tribe, and I lump them under Indian. Then we have the storytellers, and these are the people that have a story, and there are tons of them out there. Okay, and then you have known and unknown. So when we're talking about the storytellers, some of these people know what tribe their family is supposed to have been a part of, which makes it a lot easier than those that fall into the unknown, who don't know that tribe, and they first have to figure out who, what, when, where, all of that stuff, and then take a basically estimated guess, if you will, and do the research from there, hoping something turns up. A lot more challenging than the other categories. So let's get started with the history. I told you the history, the people themselves, it's thousands and thousands of years old. You look at the Choctaw themselves, they have 2 origin stories. They have the one that talks about being born from the earth. There's a mound in Mississippi, Naniwaya, and they gave birth to the Cherokee, the Muskogee, and the Chickasaw and the Choctaw. They all came out from that mound. They dried off in the sun and they went their respective ways, and that's where they ended up. They also have the story about the 2 brothers, Chickasaw and Choctaw, and coming from out west and their pole. And if you actually go to the Chickasaw Cultural Center, outside of Sulphur, Oklahoma. They have a replica there of the pole in one of their courtyards. Now, when we're looking at records from the European side of things, the Southeast is very interesting because we have so many different countries taking a part in this history. The early records that we start out with come from the Spanish. And, you know, the first explorer in this area, of course, being Hernando de Soto, right? So this map here is from 1572. And the thing that I want to show you is you look at this map, and if you can't see it from a distance, that's okay. But if you look at it close up, you're not going to see a people called Choctaw. You're not going to see a people called Muskogee or the Creek Confederacy. You're not going to see a number of peoples that you have today because they didn't exist at this time. What you did have all along this coast down into the Mississippi Delta are these independent villages that had very similar cultures. Most of them spoke a Muskogean dialect of some sort. You know, some of them were at peace with one another. Some of them did fight. Okay, there was war. There always has been at different points. Because if you think, for example, the Choctaw, they're one of their traditional enemies are the Osage. They have a long history of fighting with them. The only oddball, if you will, would be the Cherokee that are up here. The Cherokee are actually an Iroquoian-speaking people, and they come from somewhere up around the Great Lakes. We don't know when they came down to this area and settled. Sometime many years ago. All right, but they did, and they've been there ever since. So then you start seeing things change a little bit. Here's 1584. And then we go into 1657. And then we get into 1684. And this is the first European map that you are going to actually find the Choctaw listed on. Okay, the Chickasaw in these previous maps, they are listed on these. They're listed. The Cherokee are listed. But the Choctaw, this is the first time they are making their appearance. And if you look, they consist of 2 villages. Over time, they will very quickly become the largest tribe in this area. Let's see, here we have 1752 with the Osage over there, the Choctaw down here, Chickasaw, the Cherokee are up here, more over in the Tennessee area, although their territory did extend into Alabama, Georgia, and all up into West Virginia and Virginia. But as you see, the Creek are still not there. They're still their independent villages. They have not come together as one group. 1778, we start seeing some of the more common names that we have now, although spelled differently within the Muskogee, like Okmulgee. Yeah, so that leads us to just around the time of the Revolution, just after. This is what we're looking at here. This next map is really important because this shows you how fast the Indian land was taken away. Okay? So we start here, 1784, which is about where this map picks up, or leaves off, rather. So you see they still have some land there. Very quickly, by the time we get to 1820, okay, what is that, 36 years, give or take, the colonies have now expanded, and this is all that's left back east as far as tribal land.
What's the light brown one there?
Where?
There's dark brown, light brown, and white. What's the light
These
brown?
are all tribal lands, the colored ones. The different colors denote the years that they were ceded. So the different treaties. So like this one here would be 1830, 1834. right there, and then that yellowish looking color, that would be between 1820 and 1829. And then by 1840, you see that with the exception of a small spot in Indiana and one in Ohio, there is really, and in Florida, sorry, there's no tribal lands left east of the Mississippi. That's not to say that those people didn't exist there, because they did. And we'll talk about that here in a little bit. But as far as land holdings go, this was no longer considered their land. And then moving all the way up into the 70s, and you see we still have this little bit. Of course, this map is a little dated because, with McGirt and that ruling, we now have the reservations in southeastern Oklahoma as well. So the big one that we talk about is the American Indian Removal Act. Removing the Indians from this land and getting the settlers on there, getting this land in the control of the federal government was not a new concept, although everybody likes to attribute everything to Andrew Jackson. He's the one that really put things into play and was rather gung-ho about that. He pretty much, one of his big platforms to be elected was getting rid of the Indian problem. Okay. And so he is often attributed to that, but we see writings, notations, discussions going back into the colonial days. That's just the passage of this act really put things in motion, if you will. So these next slides, what I'm going to show you is we're going to look at removal, because that's the big turning point. Okay? Removal, these Indians are taken from their lands. They're relocated to Indian territory for the most part. And things begin to change historically, right? So we'll start with the Choctaw. And I start with the Choctaw because they, I'm not biased, but they were the first to actually be relocated. Okay? And, you think in terms of the Cherokee and the Trail of Tears. The Choctaw don't have a Trail of Tears. We speak of it in terms of removal. We don't, same with the Chickasaw. We don't have an actual name for it. The Trail of Tears is the Cherokee's name for it. Just like with the Dene or the Navajo, it's the Long Walk and so forth. Anyway, so this is showing you here some of the many treaties, but the final one was the Treaty of Dancing Rabbit Creek, which took care of this last little bit of land here in central Mississippi. And in 1832, the winter of 1832, I should point out, that is when the first group of Choctaw were relocated to Indian territory. So a misconception a lot of people have is that the Trail of Tears was one giant event that took place at one time. No. Removal started at this time, but continued on. There were Choctaws being removed all the way up until, I believe it was 1909. The last of them removed by, or arrived by rail car in Anadarko. Okay? But there were different removals and migrations taking place all the way back to 1832. The Muskogee were the next up that were removed. And if you look here, this was the first of their land to go. This was the second, and this was the last. This is when you really start seeing the Muskogee band together, and you look on the maps in this area, and you start seeing the words Creek Confederacy, because they're starting these villages that are left over, if you will, the remnants, are coming together to form a stronger, more organized people, left over from disease, war, etc. The Chickasaw. Now the Chickasaw are very interesting. It does say 1832. Pontotoc is their treaty there that they signed. The Chickasaw are interesting because they weren't technically removed, if you will. Okay, with their treaty, they made sure that they had the option to select their own land. So they were given the cash. They sent out scouts to Indian Territory to try and find the land that they thought was best fit for them. Problem is, Chickasaw took a little too long. Okay, so by 1837, U.S. government says, "Hey, you already signed this. You gotta go." And so when they did so, they ended up leasing land from the Choctaws in Indian Territory, and I'll show you better on a different map coming up. Cherokee had a number of sessions going on, going all the way back into the mid 1700s, I believe it was, early 1700s. Down here in what is now South Carolina today, their last bit of land that was gone was right around here, Alabama, Georgia, southern Tennessee. The Cherokee had probably one of the most violent removals. This is the group in which the federal government sent the military in with guns drawn and rounded them up like cattle. They did not have time to grab personal belongings, whatever. They were forced and removed on different routes in the middle of winter. For those individuals that could, much like with the Choctaw, they ran off. The Cherokee, they ran into the Appalachian Mountains, the woods up there, and hid out, avoiding removal. Many of them were actually very successful. I mean, that's why you have the Eastern Band of Cherokees today. The Cherokee are also interesting because the U.S. government had been working with them many years prior to these removals. Because in the 1820s, they actually signed a treaty with the Cherokee, in which a group of Cherokee, who became known as the Old Settlers, relocated voluntarily to what is northwestern Arkansas, later on to northeastern Oklahoma, and their descendants today formed the United Kituwa Band of Cherokee. And then you have the Seminole. The Seminole are very interesting because they are also, in a way, part of the Creek, if you will. These were the runaways. They said, we're not going. They took up arms themselves. You've ever heard of the Seminole Florida Wars? Yeah, that was this group here, because they kept on going and further into the Everglades, and they fought until the very end. They weren't actually forced off their land and into Indian Territory, and many of them, it was by boat, okay, through the Gulf in the 1840s. Because after they captured them, they actually, I forget where the fort is right around in here, but they held them in basically what you want to call a POW camp, okay? And then they relocated them to Indian Territory. So just a little note about the treaties during his presidency, and that's Andrew Jackson. The U.S. made 86 treaties with 26 American Indian nations between New York and the Mississippi, all of them forcing land cessions, including removals. Like I said, it had been discussed for years and years, but Jackson was the one that really pushed it and put it into motion. So when we're looking at some of these different trails, these routes that they went, so you see here, Cherokee, this blue one here, there's two routes. They went through Missouri, they went through Arkansas. You've got Creek coming through Alabama, through Tennessee, Arkansas, another group coming down Louisiana, Mississippi, Choctaw, Mississippi, Arkansas, and into Indian Territory, and then here's that little boat ride for the Seminoles. Not everybody made it. The numbers vary as far as how many died. Don't know how many people just stayed behind, period, because they could not take it. In fact, as far as the Cherokee goes, there is actually a book, and there's a lot of research been done about the trail that went through the southern part of Missouri there, because quite a few people stayed behind. There's a lot of people in those areas that do claim Cherokee ancestry, although they're not able to definitively prove it because their family stayed behind. They don't have any records to tie them to those people, right? These are the different Cherokee routes. So you see here's the Missouri. Okay, this is the one that went up the Arkansas River. This one cut across before hitting the river. Yeah. Chickasaw, they just rode straight across. This is the map I was talking to you about. Now, originally in the treaty, and depending on who you read and how they interpret it, some say that the Choctaw land did include the panhandle of Texas. That's debatable, but it was almost the entire southern portion of the state of Oklahoma. This part here became known as the leased district, as the U.S. government leased this land to place other Indians on, Plains Indians that they moved off from up here down here. Now the Choctaw lost it because they were sided with the Confederacy during the Civil War, as were the other tribes in this area. And so as penalty, the government says that land is now ours. And we are not making any more payments to you. This land here is the land that the Chickasaw leased from the Choctaw. Now, as part of that agreement, the Chickasaw were supposed to have representation on the Choctaw Council, and things didn't necessarily work out, and the Chickasaw felt like their needs weren't being met, that the Choctaw weren't living up to the agreement. So around 1855, they flat out purchased that land and called it good, leaving the Choctaw area to this and this little part until after the Civil War. All right, let's look at some numbers here. Choctaw, before removal, there was supposedly around 20,000. There was said to be about 15,000 that were removed, leaving somewhere between 5,000 and 6,000 behind, and 2,000 to 4,000 died during removal, depending on who you read and what their numbers are, because in actuality, we can't say how many people died, okay? There was nobody keeping records. Many of the officers that led these different bands on these trips, they had notebooks and stuff, but it's not like they kept detailed information about, oh, so-and-so died on this day. This person died. No. So we don't know. As far as the people that stayed behind, with regard to the Choctaw, there was a group that went down into Louisiana. But either way, both of these groups that stayed back here, they hid out in the bayous because at this point, well, let me back up for a moment, because with the Choctaw, with the Treaty of Dancing Rabbit Creek, they did have the option to stay behind. They were supposed to meet with William Ward. He was supposed to register them. They would get a plot of land. They would be U.S. citizens. In exchange, they forfeited their rights and citizenship to the Choctaw Nation. William Ward didn't want to do that. He maybe registered somewhere around 100 people, maybe 150 people. And you see we have an estimated 5,000 to 6,000 that stayed behind. Okay. So these people hid out in the swamps. They weren't citizens of the U.S., but because they had stayed behind, they weren't necessarily citizens of the Choctaw Nation. If you go back through the history books and you look at the documents in Mississippi, it was heated to say the least, because they were people of color without any rights to anything. There were different groups that continued to move, especially around in the 1890s. There was a big push from Mississippi and Louisiana of Choctaw into Indian Territory when they found out about Dawes and the allotments, so that they could take part of that. The people that actually stayed behind in Mississippi would form what is now the Mississippi Band of Choctaw. but they did not have federal recognition until about 1934, if I remember correctly. Okay. The ones that went down into Louisiana today, there's only one band that is federally recognized. It's the Jenna Band. And I don't remember offhand when they received federal recognition, but I thought it was in 1990s, somewhere in there. Then you have the Muskogee, or the Creek. There's about 22,700. And then about 19,600 were removed. There's about 744 that were left behind. And so they estimate between 3,500 and 4,500 died along the way. You have the Chickasaw, again, almost 5,000 is what the population was before removal. The total removed was about 4,600. Number remaining was about 400. And all total, there was between 500 and 800 deaths, mostly from sickness. But with these, even today, I've not come across any records or documents talking about any that their descendants are still living in that area. As far as I'm aware, they all eventually ended up in Indian Territory at one point or another, if they didn't possibly marry into another tribe. Cherokee had the largest losses, and some say as much as 25% of their population was wiped out along the Trail of Tears. Again, it depends on what you read, because if you look here, the population was 16,542, but there was supposedly 16,000 that were removed. There was supposedly already 25,000 in Indian Territory, and about 1,500 remained, with 4,000 to 8,000 having died along the Trail of Tears. And then you have the Seminole, 3,700 to 5,000 was the population beforehand. They removed between 2,800 and 4,000, and 250 to 500 or 575. Again, the numbers vary, but there were up to 5,500 that died during those wars. So whereas many of the others, they passed because of disease along the way, okay, they literally fought to their death. They were not going to Indian Territory. So here we have a map from 1890. This is Indian Territory, just before statehood. Oklahoma became state in 1907. Choctaw Nation is here. You have the Cherokee Nation here. The Muskogees are here. The Seminole, and you have the Chickasaw. Each one of these tribes has their own government. A lot of people don't realize this, and they look for, well, where are the Indian Territory records? Well, Indian Territory records don't technically exist. What tribe are you looking for? Okay. Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma had 3 districts, for example. So we had, it was Pushmataha District, Moshalatabi District, and Shonobee District. Within each one of those districts were counties. At the county level, there was a district courthouse. There are records that still exist today from those courthouses. It was very similar with the setup in the Cherokee Nation. They had counties, they had their courthouses. Many of those records exist today. Chickasaw, they kind of had counties, but it was more districts. Anyway, they did have counties, and some of those records exist. So with those people that stayed behind and between removal, today we now have state-recognized tribes, and we have federally recognized tribes. You guys know the difference? No? Okay, so federally recognized tribes have full federal recognition from the federal government. They are sovereign nations. So they have the ability to make a treaty-to-treaty type relationship with the U.S. government. They're also available for different funding and programs through the Bureau of Indian Affairs, Indian Health Services, all of that. As far as the grant writing sort of things, there are a number of programs that are funded by grants that are only available to federally recognized tribes. Their citizens are allowed to participate and do things that others would not have those opportunities. So, for example, with like Haskell Indian Nations University down the road here, you have to be at least a quarter Indian to enroll, right? And yours, last time I checked, it's been a while, but it was supposed to have been a federally recognized tribe, not state. There are other programs, though, that you might be eligible for at the state level if you are a state recognized tribe, but you don't have that recognition, that rapport, if you will, if you are at the federal level. The Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma are interesting because you'll look on these lists, there are several state recognized tribes. The Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma does not recognize them. They will tell you that the only Cherokee tribes are the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma, United Kituwa Band of Cherokee, and the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. That's it. Choctaw Nation, fortunately, they're very similar. Okay, forget the other bands in Louisiana or the MOA Band in Alabama. Okay, it is Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, Mississippi Band of Choctaw Indians, and the Jenna Band in Louisiana. But in Alabama, we have these here. Georgia, we have a couple of Cherokee groups and a Creek one. South Carolina, we have quite a few. North Carolina, has anybody heard of the Lumbees? No. Okay. They are the largest tribe east of the Mississippi. Their ancestors are native to that area, Robeson County, North Carolina, going all the way back into the 1700s and before. They are able to trace their descent from those people. They are unique because they do not have full federal recognition. They are recognized by the Senate and thereby are eligible for more programs than those that are at the state level, but they're still technically a state recognized tribe. Many of these tribes that you see on this list, they are fighting for federal recognition. Some have been told no more than once. So here we have Virginia, Louisiana, federally recognized tribes in Louisiana, of course, the Jenna Band. You have the Chitimacha tribe, the Coshada tribe, Tunica Biloxi tribe. Mississippi, you have the Mississippi Band of Choctaw Indians. Alabama, you've got the Porch Creek Band of Creek Indians. South Carolina, the Catawba Indian Nation. Florida, the first one. They are an offshoot of the Muskogee. They didn't exist until after the Seminole Wars. Okay? And then you have the Seminole Tribe of Florida. You have the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians in North Carolina. Virginia, the majority of these just gained federal recognition in the year 2017 or 18. There was a passage of a bill, and these tribes were made federally recognized tribes. Oklahoma, these are not the only federally recognized tribes in Oklahoma. These are just the ones that came from the southeast. Right? Okay, so before I move on to the genealogy part of it, went really fast. Do you have questions about any of the history part of that?
Okay, when were they? You said something like 1934, 1990, U.S. recognized them. Could they vote?
Well, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
I mean, prior to that?
Okay, so the Mississippi Band of Choctaws, no. Because they were people of color. They didn't have rights to vote in Mississippi. I want to say it was around the 50s or 60s before they finally got that. because you had Jim Crow and everything.
So U.S. recognition means what?
That they recognize you it's in other words, it's recognizing that you are a sovereign nation.
Oh, I was thinking maybe you could then vote.
No, I mean there's several bills that granted Indians U.S. citizenship and the right to vote. Going, clear back. There were several within the Dawes thing, although the 5 tribes weren't part of that, and several others. But the official, if you will, bill was in 1924, and that was when Indians were given U.S. citizenship.
That I get citizenship.
However, that didn't apply to all Indians, and technically, all Indians didn't have U.S. citizenship until the 60s.
Okay, that's good. Thank you.
You stated that the Cherokee were Iroquoian, was just in language,
Yes.
but it seemed like they were quite a ways away from where the Iroquois were at.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, upper New York. That's
Right. But if you remember, earlier I said the Cherokee originally came from the Great Lakes region.
Great Lake. On the south side, or don't know.
That's not my area. I don't know about that one. All right, not an anthropologist here. I just know it's from up the Great Lakes region, up that way. I don't. More specific than that, I don't know.
The reason I was asking, my Indian ancestry is Mohawk,
Okay.
and when they got married, my great great grandfather, my great great grandmother was a Mohawk. They were in Canada, on the Richelieu River.
Yeah.
And but I never had heard that Mohawk were that far. Did you have much information on?
I do know that there, if I remember right, there is a reservation somewhere across the border. 'Cause I want to say we went up that way one year, because I think it was the Mohawk where we stopped, and then we went straight up from New York into Canada. We went up that way.
Richelieu, and then a little ways west.
Yeah, they've got reservations and relatives up there. Some of the families may be the same family. They may be closer related instead of more distantly related, but they're just separated with that border. It's much like the same down here you see in Mississippi with the Mississippi Band of Choctaw and the Choctaw of Oklahoma. Well, they're related. Okay, they're cousins and everything, but it's just they were relocated to this area. These people stayed behind. From that point forward, their histories were slightly different. Even today, the languages are different. Like, you can still understand someone from Mississippi, but their writing, the way that they talk, they really incorporate a lot more English terms, I've noticed. Whereas, like in Oklahoma, even though the language is currently evolving, okay, they're trying to make it a little more friendly, I guess you could say. But they still, like, cousin of mine, she will not incorporate English in there. She will find some way to say it in Chattanooga and just tell you. It may be something very generic, like, the machine that talks or something. And she might use that for a computer, a telephone, a radio, and everything else. But she refuses to incorporate English into that language. So you're starting to see a lot more differences, and I'm sure it's pretty similar with them. Okay, you've got differences depending on how closely related and how much they've kept those ties in place.
Are there still Seminoles in Oklahoma?
Yeah.
In some report.
They have their own reservation down there.
We lived in Miami, so we went after the Seminoles in Florida.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I've never been, that I'm aware of, to their any of them in Florida. But yeah, I've been through their reservation in Oklahoma.
Why
I
did
knew
they
there was one in
choose?
Florida because we had one that I worked with in the post office in Colorado. And he
Oh.
was from Florida, and he was Seminole.
Cool.
Why'd they
Little
choose
guy, he wasn't very
Oklahoma?
big.
Who?
Why did they decide, I mean, they're all going to Oklahoma. Why was Oklahoma chosen? Why was that chosen?
Because the federal government said that's where you're going.
They just,
I mean, that area, technically that was the Old West, right? And technically speaking, there weren't white people living there, so they weren't going to run into any skirmishes, any fights, any arguments like you had back east. As the colonists are moving further and further southeast, okay, they're encroaching on Indian lands. You start seeing more in the older newspapers about arguments, disagreements, fights, because, well, his border is supposedly here, or they went and traded and that man wasn't happy about a trade, whatever the case may be. So you start seeing a lot more skirmishes, if you will, arguments, disagreements, and eventually you're getting into people grabbing guns and killing and things that the government didn't want happen. And people that were in that area were scared because at the time that wasn't the federal government's land, so they could not put a military post right smack in the middle of it and say, hey, we're protecting you now, be safe, right? They needed to have that land first. So Indian Territory was the West, right? There was nobody out there. Here you go. Do with what you will. Yeah, you're out of our way, essentially. Yeah. Other questions? Okay, let's go to the fun stuff. Well, it's all fun, but you know. Genealogy. All right. So where to begin? I always tell everybody start with yourself because it seems like over the last I don't know how many decades, you know, somebody's talking to Aunt Betty over here, and she's like, "Oh yeah, you know, Grandpa was Cherokee." Sorry, Cherokee is like the number one that I get. Okay, so I always got to pick on them. All right, and I'm like, okay, all right, and I asked her, yeah, I was looking for her on the rolls, and you know what? I didn't find her. Okay, where did she live? Oh well, you know, she lived in Dallas. Okay, where was she born? Oh, McKinney. So she's been in the Dallas area her entire life? Yeah. Well, where's her family from? New York. And they're Cherokee? Yep. Okay. I mean, you get where this is going, okay? But then they run into this brick wall, and that's about the time that I get a phone call or an email, and they're ready to pull their hair out because they can't find this, that, or the other. Start with yourself. Build that case, all right? Get everything that you know down because you're going to need it. Then figure out what your research question is. I always, so many people get excited and they just say, oh, I want to do my research. I want to do. Okay, you have to start somewhere though. Who do you want to find out about? Okay? Is it a grandparent? Is it your dad's line? Turn that into a question. And from there, develop a plan. Put that plan into place. Revise, repeat as many times as needed. Okay. Do you know what that tribe, the individual or family is said to be from? If you do, that is wonderful because you are ahead of the game. Okay? If you don't know, that is where we run into a lot of problems because then it becomes almost a guessing game. And then that's where I really rely on that groundwork and what information did you find out? Because then I'm going to start asking you things like, well, where's your family from? And if you tell me New York, well, the Cherokee have never been up in New York that I'm aware of, okay, anytime in the last 500-600 years, okay? So where is your family from? Because if you tell me New York, I'm going to tell you, right, then you probably should start looking at these groups and not this group down here. Doesn't matter that they spent the last 70 years in Oklahoma, right? I want to know where your family's from. Start there. And then you can start looking at tribes that are in that area and go from there. One of the quickest things you can do is you can check the census records, 1900 and 1910 census records. That's always a good option because the 1900 and 1910 census records they do have a special addendum at the bottom for Indian peoples, and it asks them about tribal affiliation. On the one, it does ask if they had an Indian name, and they would write it down. It also has questions about real estate and whatnot. Like I say, where are they from? What area did they live in? Are they still there? If that tribe is still there, contact them because they're your best help, right? They know what records exist and how to possibly find those records, because when you're dealing with Indian genealogy, it's not a one-stop shop, right? I can't go down to the road to the Indian Depot and find out all the information I need about this person, that person, right? There is no, what would you call that? I don't know. Big library. Allen County, right? There's nothing like that, because Indian records are scattered throughout the United States, and it depends on what tribe that they're from as far as where those records have ended up. Some of them may be in D.C., some of them could be in Fort Worth, they could be in Kansas City with regards to the National Archives. If you're looking at school records, anything, there's no telling, okay, because they're scattered. So this is what that special addendum looks like at the bottom of the census there for 1900, 1910. You see you have the name there. It does ask for any other name, so if they did have a different name, they could write that down. You have tribal affiliation of the individual, their parent, or their father, their mother, and then their blood quantum, right? And even though it does list blood quantum, and I know on many of our rolls today it lists blood quantum, yeah, just disregard that, okay? We'll get here in a moment why, because that blood quantum is not always correct. So this is what the 1910 census looks like. We leave off the name. We just go with tribal affiliation, blood quantum of the individual, and it also asks about whether they're white or Negro is the term that they use there. And then you have real estate. So one of the things I tell people, if you know the tribe, well, even if you don't know the tribe, okay, go to familysearch.org. They have a research wiki, okay? It's very helpful. You can search not only localities, but you can search by different ethnicities. You can search by different religions. It will tell you records that they know of that are available. It will give you a brief history of that area or that people. It will list things like where the courthouse is, okay? The district probate court has marriage and probate records from 1870. District civil court has court records. County clerk has land records from 1897. You have community health department. Okay. Record loss, if there was any fires, any tornadoes that damaged that, it will tell you here, okay? Which is great, because if you've been looking for your family and the courthouse burned down twice, you know not to go to the courthouse, all right? That just saved you a big headache right there. If the boundary was changed, if the land, now it does not tell you this as far as the tribes go, that's where your history comes into play. As if you look at, like, for the Choctaw Nation, for Cherokee Nation, part of their original territory was in Arkansas, okay? But it's not anymore. That's gone. And like I said with the Choctaw, you know, they had all of southern Oklahoma at one point or another. You go through the history and you see how that land was lost. County seat, maps. The maps are going to be really important, especially when you're looking at Indian Territory, because the boundaries for those districts within the Indian nations are not the same as they are for the counties that exist in the state of Oklahoma today. They are different. So here's an example of what you get with Choctaw Nation. It gives you an intro where tribal headquarters is. Choctaw Nation is unique because the capital is not the same place as tribal headquarters. Okay? Two different places, about a 45-minute to an hour drive apart. All right? So with that wiki, you can identify what records are potentially available for that tribe. Okay? That gives you a place to start. And from there, you can start looking for those records. Where are they located? And then the fun part is how can you either search those records or how can you get a copy of them, okay? Depending on where it is. So what records are available? When we're talking about the 5 tribes in particular, we have birth and death records, census enrollment, land, freedmen, school, church, treaty, congressional records, voting records, military records, interviews, court records, newspapers, and I know there's more that I've left off of here, but this is a great start. Birth and death records, if you have anybody in Oklahoma now, Oklahoma has some interesting privacy laws because officially the only person that can get their death certificate is the deceased.
I'm
That's it.
finding that out. Yeah.
Yep, that's it. Now, you can get the death certificate, but you have to be a direct descendant. Okay, so when I got my great-grandmother's, for example, she is my great-grandmother. There's a straight line right there. Okay, and then I had to come in with some sort of certified documentation proving my line back to her. So I had my birth certificate, my father's death certificate, and then because the wonderful state of Oklahoma for the last 10, 20 years has not been able to find my grandfather's birth certificate, I had census records. And combine that with an obituary, that was how I was able to get her death record. Took a lot of work and digging before I could even get that document.
That's crazy.
Birth, that's Oklahoma. Birth records, those are fun as well because really you're not seeing consistent birth records until about the 30s, give or take. Prior to that, they're very sporadic. And even though they have this wonderful search engine that you can go through and search, okay? Even though you can't order the records, you can at least search on here. It won't tell you the person's, how big they were, or their parents' names, but it will list their name, when they died or when they were born, and it'll give you the county and their gender. But this is not exact, and Oklahoma is wonderful in everything they do, because like with my great-great-grandmother, it's my grandmother actually. She has a birth record in 2 counties. Yeah, where their property was, it was just on this side of the county line. And because her mother died like 6-8 months after she was born, her grandfather and step-grandmother raised her. So there's a birth certificate for where she was born and one over in this county for whatever reason. Then when you look at my grandfather's, it wasn't until they released this X number of years ago that I found my grandfather's birth certificate. They had the wrong month, the wrong day. They had thrown in a few Ks, an N or 2, and I don't remember what else, but I found it. So be careful using this, okay? It exists, it's helpful, but play with it, okay? Because if you don't find it the first time around, you might want to, put an asterisk here or a question mark if you don't know a letter, something. But this gives you an example of what you see, okay? Last name first, middle initial if known, gender, the birth county, and then the month, day, and year. The other thing is they limit it to I think it's 25 at a time. So if you are looking for a very common name, you have to start putting in these different parameters to limit it down because lo and behold, I think this one popped up like 46 hits and it was like, that's too many. And that's all it will tell you is like too many. Okay? It won't show anything. Another one that you can look at are older census records from the United States. In Indian Territory, we have the 1860 U.S. Census. This census is actually lumped with the state of Arkansas census. And this census was supposed to have identified only those individuals who were considered white that were living in Indian Territory at the time. However, From my research, I have found a number of Indians that have been identified on this. It's not thorough, it's not complete, and they're not listed as Indian because they did not have that racial designation at the time. Instead, they are listed as M for mulatto. Now, as far as the peoples that were left behind in the southeast that did not come over on one of the trails, okay, same thing. You oftentimes are going to see them M for mulatto. I've seen rarely, but there has been an occasion or two where B for black. And then it's not until, I think it's around 1900 that you start seeing the I for Indian. But not only that, the Indians themselves had their own census records. Okay? So, for example, this is a copy of the 1874 Blue County census from the Choctaw Nation. These census documents are different, and I love them because I've spent the past year transcribing these censuses. Each county is slightly different. They're all handwritten, okay? And the labels, the identifiers up top are all in Choctaw. They're not in English. And the names are spelled as best as they could make them out. Good luck with mine. We have a number of other rolls, and this is just a very brief sample. But apart from Choctaw and Cherokee, you can also see Osage and Kaw and Ponca and Sioux and Mojave and many more, many more. They are all free at Access Genealogy. Okay, you can go through there. That's the link, and it has them on there to pull it up there now. Here's a slight issue with this. They're free, which is great. Problem is, they took that microfilm and they just put it on the computer. So it pulls up that microfilm and you're sitting there, click, 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 till you find what you need. Some of these records are on Ancestry.com and you can search them, but it's not always the easiest because of the way they are transcribed. Some of these records on Access Genealogy are typed. Where's my example? Oops, I'm going the wrong way. Goodness. Oh, there it is. So some of these are typed, like you see here. Okay, this is from the Cheyenne and Arapaho Agency. And that's, let me back up because that's the other thing you have to pay attention to is, especially in Indian Territory, the BIA had different Indian agencies that handled these different Indian groups. So you need to pay attention to the history of the people you're looking at with regard to what Indian agency they were a part of. Because if you look, for example, the Kaw Nation, at one point they did have a Kaw agency in Newkirk. After that, it was moved to the Ponca agency in Ponca City, and then later on it was moved to the Pawnee agency further south. So depending upon what Indian agency that they were handling their affairs is where those records are going to be located. Okay, it's not going to say the record group for the Kaw Nation of 1930 whatever. It'll say the Pawnee agency, and then when you start going through there, there'll be a little screen on there that says that it has census records for Kaw, Pawnee, Ponca, and I forget who else are in there. Okay. The information that is on these censuses varies by people. It varies by year. The years that they start, the years that they end, all vary as well. You have some censuses on here that go all the way back to the 1870s. You have some that don't even start until the 1900s. Some of them will give you the Indian name as best as they heard it. They will give you the white name. They will give you the relationship, the age. Some go so far as to give you the date of birth. Okay. Some will give you blood quantum. Some will give you the enrollment number, allotment number, parcel number, again, depending on the tribe and the year and any remarks. Some of these censuses have a special addendum at the end where they list everybody that died that previous year. Some of those will even list the day they died. Some go even so far as to list how they died. Again, it all depends on the tribe, the people, and the year. There is no consistency here. Okay, so example of Ancestry.com. This is coming from Albert Whitewolf here. And this is what you see if you entered in the search. And here's another example of what you get. So let's talk about enrollment records. Because all of these tribes, these 5 in particular, they have enrollment records. Well, every tribe has some sort of enrollment records, because everyone has a final roll in which enrollment today is used, right? So with these 5 tribes, it's the Dawes roll. And the Dawes was very unique and had many stipulations. If you remember correctly, or if you remember, I told you not too long ago, I said it showed you the blood quantum, but disregard that. Because full bloods, 3/4 bloods, and I believe it was even half bloods, they were deemed incompetent to handle their own affairs. So they were appointed an agent to handle their affairs. Those individuals would sell their land for them, lease their land to the oil companies, things like that. However, a bunch of shady deals were done, and most of the time that money was pocketed by the lawyers and not by the families themselves. So what Indians started doing is changing their blood quantum. So when they enrolled, they said, no, I'm just an agent. Well, legally, they handled their own affairs because they were competent. So one family, for example, that I can think of, it's a Choctaw family. You've got one brother that is full blood, one that's 7/8, one that's like 3/8, one that every one of them has a different blood quantum. Okay, and this is why they were doing this. Now, the Dawes had their own sets of rules and everything. Okay? One of the biggest ones is residency. Now, if your family stayed behind, or maybe there were a number of Choctaws and Chickasaws that went on over into Texas and settled, and then when they heard about the Dawes, they hopped on the wagon and went on up there to the camps and tried to enroll, and they were denied because they did not live in Indian Territory. They had not lived in Indian Territory. Their parents had not lived in Indian Territory. If your families were not living in Indian Territory during this time, they're not going to be on these lists, these final rolls. Okay. Another stipulation with the Dawes roll is, I don't know about your families, but mine, these Indian men, they love women. And one of their favorite tasks was making babies. Okay. Now, if they weren't married, the child took the enrollment status of the mother. So if the father happened to get with a white lady, as I did have with a great uncle that happened, even though he is half-blood, okay, because he was illegitimate, he took the enrollment of his mother, and he was deemed white, not Indian. And his enrollment was denied. And he was never enrolled in our tribe. So there are a number of different stipulations that took place during this time. They did what they could to keep as many people from enrolling as they possibly could. Right? Now, if by chance they did get a chance to enroll, even if they applied, they made it that far, you're going to find some information like their roll number, their name, as best as they could spell it, their relationship, the age, sex, blood quantum. And then you see this little information about tribal enrollment. And this is where they went back and they verified that information. So like with Ellis and Willis here, they were able to verify that they were on the 1896 Choctaw census. Okay? And with Scylla, she was on the 1893 payroll census. That's what those are referring to. And the counties, again, are referring to the tribal counties that existed prior to statehood. And then the parents' names, and then whatever county that they were from. They do have a number of notes at the bottom where you can find things like number 4 died November 29th, 1899. Thing that I love with these enrollment records is in the enrollment packets, oftentimes you can find birth, marriage, death affidavits, divorce decrees that you would not normally have if you were doing research in Indian Territory at that time, right? So here's an example of the marriage affidavit I was talking about. The minister, Morgan Cole, he just wrote a short little note. He also happened to be a very well-respected judge in the area. Wrote a little handwritten note saying, I married these two on this date in this place. And that was their marriage license. And that satisfied Dawes for enrollment purposes. Some of those packets, it's just miscellaneous, correspondence in between the BIA and the family. So this is just a note acknowledging that they received his letter concerning the enrollment of, I believe it was his wife. His wife, Hattie. Other times when they still weren't sure about the individual, they interviewed them. And this is where you can find a lot of juicy information. So they ask things like your name, your age, where's your post office, and how long have you lived in that area? Have you been married before? Your kids' names, their ages, your wife's parents' names, anything and everything you can think of. Now, if you're looking for freedmen records, then they get even more controversial because a lot of the times they were trying to decide whether they were more black or more Indian. So they were looking in the one file that I had read, they were talking about the lady's skin tone, her hair texture, the size of her nose, other physical features to determine whether she would be constituted a black person or a Choctaw person. So you find all sorts of things within these documents. We also have Oklahoma land records that you can search. okcountyrecords.com, and they have a number of, you can download, you have to sign up and you have to buy these little coins and use those to get the actual images, but you can at least search and it'll tell you what's out there, whether it's a deed or what kind of record and where the land is, the county and the description. Is anybody looking for freedmen records? Freedmen? Okay, I'm going to skip over this. But if you know of anybody that are definitely into freedmen, visit the Oklahoma Historical Society in Oklahoma City because they have a huge repository of records. There's that. School records can be very, very helpful. If you've heard of the Cherokee male and female seminaries, well-respected schools, their records somehow ended up at the Western History Collection, University of Oklahoma, and it's not very consistent. They have all kinds of, they've got old yearbooks, they have curriculum, textbooks, oddball stuff. Anybody have family that go through Chilocco? Those records ended up in Fort Worth. You can actually search the National Archives online and find the files. So I found my grandmother's. And then just a quick email to the archives at Fort Worth. They'll tell you that they were able to locate it. They'll tell you how many pages it is and what the cost is for that. Now, each individual file is not the exact same. So like her file was some 52 pages, I think. And it included a lot of health information. It included her original application. It included correspondence from different family members to the nurse and superintendent of schools, her grades, things like that. So depending on the person, like I say, not every file is the exact same because hers even included an intelligence test in there that they had her do when she arrived there. And so I have not seen that in all of the files. Now, some of the yearbooks are online and searchable, and the Alumni Association is still well and going. They have a Facebook group, and they meet every year down on the grounds of Chilocco. Oklahoma school records, every county is different as far as the year and the time frame, but you can find these on FamilySearch.org. Okay, and they will tell you things like the parent or guardian, their post office. Okay, they will tell you the name of the tribe if there is a tribe or if they know, and then You see here with this family, it says W for white. That is because in Oklahoma, Indian is not an official racial designation. They are considered white for race purposes, even up until 20. When did I sign that last contract? 2019. It's still, there was not Indian. I had a choice between white, black, Hispanic, and Asian. So you will see white on here. Okay. Sex, and then the date of birth. Some of them just list the age, but a lot do have date of birth. And again, the years that these are available. So this one is from 34. And Pushmataha County, I've seen them go all the way up. See, they've got my father's from the 1950s. So that is one of the latest ones. Not all of them go up that far, and not all of them go back that far. It's a county by county situation. But they are free and available on FamilySearch.org. You can also find things like quarterly reports, neighborhood day schools. They have the grades and attendance records. Family Search has them online, but do I have them now? But they are not searchable. What they've done, again, is they've just taken that microfilm and they've put it on the internet, and you're just clicking through there. The other thing with Family Search is that you actually have to go to an official Family Search designated site. So in Wichita, we have 3 of those. There's the Downtown Public Library. There is the LDS Research Center at Westlink, and then there's Derby LDS Library. Those are the only ones in the Wichita area that you would be able to see those. Otherwise, you do not get access from it at home. It has a little lock thing, and it'll tell you, please go see one of our affiliates. And the information that's on there, it varies. It can be something as simple as a name, the age, the tribe, and what subjects that they took part in. Some of them will have grades on them. Some of them will have attendance information. Then this one, this is an uncle's from Carlisle. And the Carlisle records are being transcribed and put online. But this is one I found at the National Archives in DC. So they are spread out all over. But you have just some basic information. Again, it was nice to have a picture of it. No. Because I also found his report card, and I found some telegrams and correspondence between the family and the people at the school as well. You have church records. A lot of people don't think about the church records, but many churches have some sort of archives. Methodist Church, they do online have a searchable database that it doesn't have all the information, but it does have in their books, the Indian Mission of Oklahoma Conference Journal for the different years. It will list the if your family was involved in, like he was an actual minister, but lay people, people involved in the church, they will be listed in there. Some of them might have pictures in them, not often. A lot of them will have names, addresses, these. But like this one is free, you can access straight up. Presbyterian Church has one that you can get online, access it, no problem. Assembly of God, Pentecostal, they have one online, but you first have to apply and get approved, and then they grant you access. The documents, of course, vary between the different religions. Treaties, a lot of people don't think about treaties, looking for that for family members, but they had to be signed by someone. And in a lot of those treaties too, you look through them, there's usually some sort of clause or section in which they're making payments to this person or that person for this or that. Like one, for example, it was being paid to a widow. Can't think of her name, but it listed out her name. Then in another section, there was payment to orphans. And so if you go, there's another document, but if you pull that up, it goes through and actually lists all the orphans' names who were to be paid. So they can be a source of information. Congressional records, you may not think about it, and these can be very dry, okay? But you can find a lot of information because like this one here, there were a number of citizens from Cedar County, which is most of Choctaw County today, that had petitioned the federal government. And as I'm going through here, there's a number of family members' names that were on here. And as I did more research, I found out that many of these people were also their neighbors as well, that weren't family members. So it could give you a clue. Okay? Could. Worth checking out. Choctaw Nation, one of the things we have are voting records. Again, these are accessible on Family Search from one of the actual affiliates. But this is from Double Springs Precinct, and this just gives you an example. It lists out the name, and then they'll have different columns who they voted for, which, you know, I know that may not help you, but if there were family members that went and voted together, you might find somebody. I just think it's kind of cool to find out who they voted for because it adds to that story, right? And these are going to be tribal elections. This has nothing to do with the U.S. government. You have the Indian Pioneer Papers. Anybody heard of those? Oh, you got to check them out. So WPA, Works Progress Administration, went through and interviewed a number of individuals back in the 30s in Oklahoma. Many of them were Indians, but all of them had some tie to the different Indian nations in that area. And they asked, at the very beginning, you find the field worker's name, the interviewee's name, their address. They also ask about the parents and where their parents are from. These interviews almost always start out with information about their families. So if you look here, he's saying where he was born in Mississippi, 1837, whether he came over on the trail, you name it. Okay, this one, let's see, what is this one? Oh, this was Elias. Okay, they did 4, if I remember correctly, and they interviewed him about his different political views because he was involved in tribal politics. They also asked about cultural things. They would ask them about the cries. They would ask them about burial rites. They asked them about the Civil War, recollections, Trail of Tears, you name it. There is an assortment of information on here. And you can find all kinds of things, not just cultural and historical, but with regard to your family. It's like when they interviewed him, you know, he talked about his parents being Thomas and I think he called her Louisiana at that point, but she went by Simon. But he mentions that she was a granddaughter of Aaron Blanche. Boom, there's another branch added to the tree that we didn't know about. Don't know which grandparent, but I don't care. Okay, it's another branch. And they'll talk about siblings' names. No telling what you're going to find here. The same token, you have the Doris Duke collection that came much later, started in 1967. This is only Indians, though. Whereas this other one, you're going to find people that are affiliated with the tribe, so it's a mixture of people, white, Indian, black, you name it. Okay, this one is only Indians, and this is later in time. Again, these are all housed on OU's server, and they are free to search at any given time online. Here is an example of the different county backgrounds for the Cherokee Nation. I told you guys about the Choctaw Nation, and this is the location of their different courts. These court records are all at different places. It depends on which tribe, what time period you're looking at, because Cherokee, they have their own archives, right? And they have records going all the way back into the 1830s. Now, you're going to need some good eyes and somebody that speaks Old Cherokee to help you with those old records, okay? But they exist. And again, this was Choctaw Nation, and here is Cherokee Nation. And so an example of one of the court records, this is a bad copy, sorry. So one of the ones that I found, it's case number 259, a petition of Folsom McGee continued to 2 o'clock in the afternoon to be taken up. Court ready to try case number 266, in which George Secor is complainant and Jane Hagwood is defendant. That was all I found for that entry. Okay, kind of boring. Doesn't really help me. Another one that I found, though, I did find out that a set of whatever great something grandparents, they had adopted a kid. I didn't find the child's name, but I learned that going through the records. Let's see. Another one that I found, no, wait, that's coming up. Stop. We also have tribal council records. A lot of people don't think about these records when they are doing their research, but you can definitely find things like, for example, this gentleman here, where is his name? Mr. A, I think it was Nichols. He was paid for cleaning out the building after the tribal council meetings. Okay? So you get a little bit about what he was paid then, his job, his role, and his name. I mean, I've found miniature lists in some of these records where they've listed out, different payments for they served on juries, or they did road work, or they were being paid as teachers, or they did something. Anytime there was a payment, there's some sort of act from the council, and they're listed in that. But that can definitely help you find additional branches, right? Then you have county ranger records, and this one is from Cedar County in 1880. And this was the fun one that I loved, because in this one here, this is just to give you an example of the original records. These are available on Family Search, again, from that affiliate, right? Not any Family Search library. But these are written in Old Choctaw. This one is fun because it is the sheriff arresting his dad for stealing a cow. So I enjoyed reading that one. Newspapers, Cherokee Nation, they have the oldest tribal paper. Okay, they're started back in 1830-something, if I remember right. No, 1828. There it is right there. These papers are in Cherokee. Some of them are in Cherokee and English. A lot of these papers can be accessed on newspapers.com. Not all of them. They're adding more, though, but a lot of them can. The other thing is to find out whether, I shouldn't say whether, but what your tribe or nation's tribal paper is called. Okay? Because we have the Bishnik, or they're calling it now the Biskinik, but all of these 5 tribes in Oklahoma have their own tribal papers. And these tribal papers go all the way back. And before you had, the Bishnik, then they had one that was Hello Choctaws, and then they had some others prior to that, but they're all housed in different locations. So the Biskinik, the Bishnik, they're all in Durant, but those Hello Choctaws are in Little Rock. Okay. Some of the other older papers from what was Atoka County, not the current Atoka County, but the tribal county, you can find those on newspapers.com. The Cherokee, they have their archives that they have copies of them, but all of these papers are going to have a lot of wonderful information. It's through these, like with my great-grandfather, they had a fire, so they lost all the family photos. And I've never seen a picture of him until I actually found a picture of him and my step-great-grandmother. It was something about his birthday and their anniversary. Only picture I've ever seen of him. So you can find a lot of information that you wouldn't normally find in some of the regular newspapers, right? So this just gives you an example of some of the Cherokee papers that you can find on newspapers.com and the years. So you've got some Cherokee Phoenixes from 1828 to 1849, but the Cherokee Capital for only 1888. Library of Congress is another site that you can find old newspapers for free. If you're looking at some of these border states, feel free to check out the surrounding state as well. as I know I have found a number of Choctaws in Texas papers and Arkansas papers as well, because oftentimes they would cross those borders to go get married, or they had a sanitarium of some sort down in Paris, Texas. They did a lot of trading down in Paris, so depending on where these people are, you may want to check the neighboring states as well. So this is the place in Little Rock I was telling you about, Sequoia National Research Center. They have the largest repository in the United States of tribal newspapers. And so if you are looking for some sort of tribal newspaper, this is your one-stop shop here. They're not going to have everything, right? But they have the largest collection out of anyone from an assortment of tribes. They also have a number of books and research and other things as well. Then again, many tribes have their own heritage, cultural, history, archives, genealogy department, and/or museum, depending. Because when I worked for Kaw Nation, they had an anthropologist there who also doubled as a museum director, who also had care of all the old records. What and how these operate all vary by tribe, because, for example, Choctaw Nation has a genealogy department, but they don't do genealogy. Okay? They will look up your Dawes roll number for you, but first you need to provide the ancestor's name, their date of birth, their siblings, their grandparents, etc. Okay? Cherokee Nation will do genealogical research for you. They've got about a 6 to 12 month backup right now. And if I remember right, it's either $25 or $50 an hour for research. They're not cheap. Down in so you have the Cultural Center for the Chickasaw, and to the back of the property there is the Palisto Center, and they have their archives and research there. They have a number of Chickasaw documents and family histories and family records, but they're also trying to build up a large Southeastern Indian collection in general. And that, you can stop by there, help friendly, no issues there. Last I checked with Cherokee Archives, you do have to have an appointment. And again, everybody's different. Muskogee Creek, they've had an archives historical society going back to the 1970s. Okay? It's one of the oldest in Oklahoma, but it's not very accessible. They're not online. You got to find somebody to let you in the building to be able to do that research. It's a little bit tedious. So it is worth it to call and/or email. And please keep in mind, they run on Indian time, all right? So don't expect a response within an hour, all right? That's all I'm saying. So I will just talk to you a little bit about DNA before we go further, because I always have questions about this. You can definitely do DNA tests. That will help you. But as of today, there is no DNA test that will tell you what tribe or nation your family is from. DNA, especially when you do the autosomal DNA test, they only go back roughly 5 generations. Okay? And it's a mixture. Depending on the testing company, it will tell you what your heritage is. So, for example, Ancestry has a, what do they call that? Mexican Indian category, but then MyHeritage has like a Mesoamerican and Andean American and Inuit, and then they differentiate Native American from this Indian. It's very different. Every company has their own parameters and labels, if you will, as far as what, who, when, but with those autosomal DNA tests, that's giving you just a snapshot of who or what you are. It's not going to tell you that your 3 times great-grandmother was Cherokee, right? It's just not going to do that. The science is not there. You have a Y-DNA test, yes, it'll show you your ancestry going all the way back to that supposed Adam and Eve in Africa, right? But it's not going to show anything in between there. Just like with the mtDNA, it's going to show the woman all the way back, right? But you're not going to see that one, ooh, a descendant from Nancy Ward. Okay, it's not going to be there. So DNA is great. It's fun. It can be helpful, but keep in mind, especially when it comes to Indian genealogy, there are limitations to it. Okay. Okay. I went over that really fast. But that's good. I did bring some other things with me. You're welcome to check out. But just give you an idea, because these are things I've picked up over the years, and they are scattered. So I talked about the Chickasaw. Chickasaw actually have their own historical society, and as far as I know, they are the only ones that publish a historical journal. Okay. It's quarterly, and I brought some of those with me. Of course, we have the Trail of Tears. You know, these little picture books that are great. They give you a snapshot into what life was like, but you can sometimes find old family photographs with a brief description of them. You're looking for history and stuff. I mean, do your research, okay? I mean, John Grisham isn't going to write the definitive history of the Southeastern Indians, right? You're going to want something more by Hudson or Foreman or one of the others. There are a number out there. The other thing is if you belong to some of those offshoots, just look, because this book is from, I think, 1909. Yeah. This one is the Bayou Lacombe Choctaw. And even though it was written by an anthropologist and it has a lot of that, there are terms, pictures, cultural items discussed in here that give you an idea of what life was like. It even talks about some of the people. You have family histories that you can find, and this was one of my random finds that have not just history and pictures, but also tribal history as well. She's listed out one of their old family cemeteries that I don't even know if it's been fully canvassed today or not. If you're doing Cherokee ancestry, this is the book. You'll want this book, okay? He does an excellent job listing every single role and record that the National Archives mention. He puts examples of what they look like, which you'll find on there, right? If you're looking for, again, Black Indian genealogy or Freedmen, there are a number of books that are now available. There are even PowerPoints and lectures that are done through Oklahoma Historical Society, Legacy, and some others. On the regular, though. Bryan County. If you get to Bryan County, if you're looking for Choctaw, Chickasaw, they have transcribed a number of the records that you can both view, and they are available for purchase. But they have things like the 1855 census, then they have like the court records for Jack's Fork County and a number more. You know, there are several indexes, like this one is to brides of Pushmataha County from 1907 to 94. Many of the small little historical societies have put together their own histories, whether it be of the county or of the city, but you'll find information about family within there. And then again, going back to our school records, a number of individual researchers have put together recollections from people with regard to their experiences. This is from Chilocco, and there's several on Chilocco. The biggest one probably Loma Waya, but Brenda Child also did one on the boarding schools up in the Dakotas, so forth. And if you're looking for a good, quick little book to help you with your research, this is something one of our members put together at WGS, but it has a spot for source citation, pedigree charts, footnotes, everything. You can also write to it was in the Department of Tourism. I would have to double check. But they put together this little brochure that tells you the name, contact information of every tribe in Oklahoma, along with all of the county historical societies as well. and you can get that free through them. Other than that, questions? Yes,
I
sir.
have a question. Is there a blood type that is common amongst American Indians?
Oh,
I had a son that was pulled into the hospital because of kidney failure. And the lab work they done on him, he came back with AB. They came out and asked me if I had Indian ancestry. At that time, I didn't know. But they said that they knew that this AB was supposed to be a common blood type, and I'd never heard that.
as far as I know, it's O.
Yeah,
That's all I've ever heard.
Mine's a-
But Indians are very much like Europeans in that regard, and that you can almost end up with any blood type. Because if you think about it, going back, we talked earlier on about the history and how these tribes came together to form new tribes. Okay, Cherokee Nation, for example, if you have ties to them, they were one of the earliest ones to start intermarrying with whites. And they have white ancestry going back into the 1700s. So, 10 times great granddaddy could have dropped the gene off somewhere, okay? And it's still being passed down to the generations these days. Anything's possible. But as far as I'm aware, O is the most common.
I had never heard of that, of AB.
I haven't either.
I have
Yes.
two questions. The first one is, you said, this says you're Choctaw.
Mhm.
Where'd that name come from? And I was kind of curious about all these names, but just tell me Choctaw. Where'd that name come from, and what does it mean? Oh, okay.
So one of the theories or ideas is that it came from the Spanish Choctaw, which has to deal with being flat, because one of the practices that they had in ancient times is on the cradles, they would put a band across the child's forehead to flatten their foreheads. Okay, that is one of the common theories. Now, as far as, because this is actually, glad you asked that, this is research I've been doing the last couple of years. The language itself is a combination of a number of different dialects from that area, because you had a number of Muskogean speaking peoples come together. Plus you had influence of the Spanish, the French. You start seeing those influences as far as the 1600s. Okay? And they've been able to tie things like our word for cat is catos, which is tied to Spanish gato. The list goes on. Okay, but as far as the name goes, that is one of the popular theories.
The other question is, I assume this is a hobby. So do you have a job? What's your job?
I teach
Oh, teach what?
first grade,
Oh.
and then I also teach math at WSU Tech as part of their GED program.
In Wichita, you teach in Wichita. Oh, wonderful.
Other questions?
I have a vague memory. It may not be a good memory, but it seems like I read in fairly recent times about a prominent Choctaw chief, perhaps, that was also a slave owner.
Oh, there were a number.
Was there?
So we talk about them in terms of the 5 tribes today, but prior to is the 5 civilized tribes. Civilized being dropped because it's considered derogatory, because the civilized tribes were not seen as quite the savages that the others were, because they adapted many of the white ways. So if you look at the Choctaw, even today, the traditional dress, you've got the black hat, the black pants, the ribbon shirt. That didn't come until after trading with the Europeans. Slavery, unfortunately, is one of the things that was picked up. The Choctaw, the Chickasaw, the Cherokee, they practiced it. Now, it was primarily the mixed blood families that did own these slaves. You go further back in history, though, some of the historically villages that were tied, or towns that were tied to the Choctaw, were some of the largest mixed areas in the southeast, like Mobile, for example. There were blacks, Indians, whites, all living together, all mixed in harmony way back, going back in the 1700s, and who knows how far back before. But it's just, Europeans have their influence, and yeah. So.
I liked your reference to Indian time, having done business with the Navajos and Hopis for a number of years. I learned about Indian time.
I try to explain that to people because, we have family get-togethers and stuff, and we don't tell you dinner's at 4. We say it'll be ready about 4. So come about 6, okay? But yeah, when I've worked in business, tribal business, and even still, there's not that 100% adaptation of the American sense of time. It gets done when it gets done, all right?
I remember my frustration, I flashed a letter, says right here, we're gonna meet on this date, this time. Well, they're not even on the reservation, they're in another state.
Yeah.
When are they gonna be back? I don't know.
Yeah.
Sometime, probably the next 2 or 3 days. I waited 2 or 3 days, they came.
Exactly.
When you're talking about mixing in the South, is that where red bone comes from, or is that something else? Okay.
So if you think about it, in the Appalachians, they have some of the largest triracial isolates in the U.S., and there are a number of groups, Redbone being one of them. Lumbee is even lumped into them, and several other groups, because they're isolated communities, and choosings were slim, and so you had a lot of inbreeding, but those mixtures end up, because like they did, if I remember correctly, there was a DNA study with the Lumbee peoples, and there is no one set, like 30, 30, 30, and then 10%, right? Some people might be more black, some are more white, all kinds of mixtures. And this was going on way back into the 1500s and before, because they found records now of Portuguese settlers being on those coasts and stuff. So, there's no telling what kind of mixings you had. Now, as far as the Choctaw, I know that the big ones, especially down there, Alabama, you've got black, Indian, white. They had one of the largest, Mobile, that was the largest town of free people of color, if you will, at that time, when this was unheard of. It was different. Other questions? I was gonna say, do you guys have, when, I'm assuming they sign in, but do you take their email addresses down?
We do maybe some.
I'm gonna say, because if I get those email addresses, I do have every one of the links that I talk about, and I can send those out to you guys. I just don't print it off anymore because too many people were like, well, I want electronic because then I can click. I don't have to type. So I don't print off copies anymore, but I do have that if you want, and I can email that to you. Just make sure they or I have your email address so I can get that to you.
We can get them wrote down.
Okay.
And we can write it down and sign them.
Okay.
Absolutely. A lot of these are members.
Okay. Awesome. Anything else?
Well, thank you so much. That was
Thank
really
you.
very informative.
Yeah, thank you. If you think of anything, my email address is up there. Just shoot me an email, and I'll get back to you next week sometime. This week is going to be crazy.
Random question.
Yeah.
With my dad teaching at Castle, would he have had his